Again, it's not saying technology addiction isn't a thing. It's that we are still in the process of studying it and figuring out how it manifests so that we can properly diagnose it.
There's not an official treatment for it.
Exactly. Yes. And since there's none of those things have been fully developed, our society can't really even start tackling it, at least our professionals, our medical professionals.
Welcome to TBC Extra, a weekly podcast of our Sunday sermon and a little extra. I am Teresa Jenkins, the communications director here at Topeka Bible Church.
And I'm Jason Brent, the children's pastor at Topeka Bible Church, and we're glad you're here. And now for a little extra.
Oh, it's Peter calling. Yes, sir. What's up?
Teresa, it's time to start the podcast. You're on.
Oh, we're on. Jason.
Oh.
We are on.
Sorry.
Hi. Welcome to the podcast. Yes, we are here. We're live.
Yes,
And
we are.
I am
technology
so sorry.
was.
We were on our phones. We were addicted to our screens. Actually, we were just having a little fun.
Just kidding.
Because this sermon this week from our student ministry pastor, Jeremy McGrath, it's called Disconnected, and it's about screen addictions.
Yeah, the value of disconnecting.
Yes, and so we thought we'd do that for you. But we want to welcome you here, and we do want to talk about real screen addictions or technology device addictions that we have struggled with over our lives. And I know mine is going to be from way back before yours, but do you want to share yours? And then we'll go back in the way back machine.
Well, I just, technology and addiction, I've never been a very video game type person. But when I was in college, I think it was Nintendo 64 had had the GoldenEye game, the James Bond GoldenEye.
Yes.
And man, oh man, I really had not liked any video game up until that point, but there's something about being able to play it with like 6 people at a time and we had like tournaments and that kind of thing in our dorm rooms and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I spent way too many hours playing in college, playing GoldenEye and trying to get good at that game.
So you know how we have iPhones, and you and I do, and we have that screen time update each week. I get mine on Sunday mornings, which I think is funny.
I think that's when mine comes too. Honestly, I'm usually at church and it tells me.
I'm at church when it tells me. Yeah. But if you had that for your Nintendo 64, it would have probably been a pretty big.
Yeah, I was trying to check. I'm not good enough at my technology. Here it tells me. I was trying to see, but this morning we were talking about this.
Yes.
And it was early this morning. I mean, fairly early. We just got in the office, and I had 17 pickups on my phone. And I'm trying to find that again now.
Yeah.
Because it tells you how many times you pick it up. And
I don't remember what that's under. Do you know?
My most pickups for the week was Sunday of 126 is what mine says. So I picked up my phone 126 times on Sunday. I can't see right now I will look into that mine later. Today. But
while you're doing that, mine was from a little bit earlier than that. About what year was that?
That would have been like 2000.
Okay, this would have been from about 1979. It's funny when I try to remember my childhood.
So when you say before my time, you really mean before I was born?
Before you were born. We didn't have any electronic toys that I can think of right now. I don't count like Rock'em Sock'em robots because I think those were mechanical. But we had battery-powered stuff, but not what we would call technology, digital electronic stuff. And we got something that was like a handheld game. I thought it was like a bowling game or something.
Was it
like
Operation?
That. No. It was something handheld. And we got it as a family Christmas gift.
Oh.
And it was from the Radio Shack. I do remember that.
Is it a good old Tandy?
Probably
Tandy
product.
brand
and
or
we
realistic?
passed it back and forth between my mother and I mostly.
Uh-huh.
And apparently that created some tensions with probably me not sharing. I'm going to guess. Let's just be honest.
Yeah.
It was me not sharing. And it malfunctioned like probably 2 weeks after Christmas, if I had to guess,
Wow.
within the return window. And
You played it
I
enough to break it
expected-
within the return window.
Well,
yeah.
I expected my dad to take it back to the Radio Shack and exchange it for a working one.
Yeah.
And he came home and said he had returned it
Yep.
because he did not like the
Hey,
amount
what
of
a wise thing for him to
anxiousness
do.
and all
He
that.
knew.
And in the end, it was a good move. But I find like now when I have downtime, instead of like journaling or calling someone who hasn't heard from me for a while, connecting with people, doing something, I will pick up my iPad and play. It's a game called Colonist.io. It's like Settlers of Catan, if you know what that game is.
I do know what that game
I
is.
really enjoy it. And like Jeremy was talking about on Sunday, which you will soon hear in the
Candy
sermon.
Crush even.
Like it's designed to make you feel good. Like even when you lose it, because you're playing
Right.
one-on-one.
There's just so
it's
many
designed
things.
to encourage you to try again.
There's so many things that you can have on iPhone or technology that can draw you in like that.
Yes.
The videos or games or, social
Movies,
media, that kind of
movies.
thing.
Yeah, like
So,
binge
yeah.
watch, the ability to binge watch things.
Yeah, isn't that crazy?
Justin and I have a show called The Pit that's only 3 or 4 episodes in. And it's one that drops every week on Thursday.
Yeah.
And we don't watch network TV anymore. We just
You don't even
stream.
know what to do because you can't
And
see
it's
what
like-
happens.
And I almost have to go back and rewatch the episode. Whereas if I was watching less on streaming, I think my mind would be a little more clear to remember what happened last week on our
Right.
favorite show.
There you go.
So, oh well, yeah. So, that said, anything else?
I was flashing back also in first grade. We got an Apple IIe computer. I was probably one of my first friends to have a computer. I don't know why we got that, but I just remember rushing home with my brother to play Oregon Trail. Like we just couldn't wait to see if we can make it all the way to the Oregon Trail.
I
Yeah.
had a class in middle school that we played that. Yes. And our first computer at home was a TRS 80 color computer too.
Ooh.
Also from Radio Shack. That's the RS.
Yes.
Yeah. It didn't have a hard drive.
Wow.
You couldn't store
I don't
anything
know
on it.
if the Apple IIe, I would have to ask my brother. He's the techie person, but ours might not have. We had my big discs. We had to put the game in.
Yes.
Ours probably didn't have it.
have a hard-
I
like a
probably didn't.
storage.
And I know my dad got it from the computer or the Apple Patch
Yes.
is the Apple store, and my uncle worked there. That's why
Oh.
we probably got it. So.
Okay, cool. I think ours had a tape recorder type thing that you put tapes in, and that's what you stored anything that you had programmed. We got it to teach me how to do programming, which
Yeah.
didn't stick.
10, 20, 30, 40 print.
Yes. Anyway, all right. Well, let's go ahead and get to the sermon. It is so good.
Yes.
And I am going to go back and give it yet another listen. I encourage you to do too afterwards. But first, stop by back in the studio, and Jeremy will be here to talk more.
Oh, someone call me? Oh, you just said good morning. Good morning, Lori. Lori's my assistant, and every time she says Jeremy, I think I'm in trouble, so I just had a little PTSD up here. Hey, I'm super excited to be here this morning. You guys are going to get to hear the last sermon in the sermon series we've been going through over Big Weekend. And the theme, as you guys see, is disconnected. how our tech use, social media, entertainment, and video games, though it promises to make us more connected and more fulfilled, often leaves us less. And the last couple series or sermons we've gone through, we've talked about how it disconnects us from love, how it disconnects us from presence, and how it disconnects us from freedom. And today we're going to kind of smoosh them all together. So I'm sorry, students, you're going to hear about 50% of the same information, but the other 50 is going to be new. But oh man, there was so much good stuff we talked about this weekend. I really wanted to bring and share with you guys as well, okay? Also, just real quick note, Doug said that the students got to hear some great sermons from me, and they got to hear one on Friday night, but Chris Mamalidi, who works with Haiti Lifeline, he actually graciously took the other two on Saturday for me. And so if you see Chris, give him a big thank you. He did a fantastic job, and I literally could not have done this weekend without him. I barely got through it as it was. But man, let's get into this sermon. And before we do, I just have one thing I want to say. I feel right now like Paul when he went to Troas. And when he went to this city, he got there early in the morning, he started preaching, and he just had so much he wanted to say that he preached until midnight, and someone fell out of a window and died. But he's Paul, so he healed him. It was okay. But that's how long I want to preach. Don't fall out of your chair, though. I don't have Paul's healing power. But man, I want to preach that long, but we can't. I heard there's something important happening this afternoon, and I don't think you guys would stay. Anyways, but in saying that, I have 35 minutes then to say all of this stuff. Man, so much stuff. And so, but it's all really good. It's all really, really, really good. This is maybe the most excited I've been to preach to you guys. And I think if you really lock in, this could be transformational for you, for your family, and for your community, and just us as a church. So I need you to do something. Turn to your neighbor for me. Point your finger at them. Turn to your neighbor, point your finger at them, and say, "You need to hear this." And then point your finger at yourself and say, "I need to hear this." Okay, well, with that out of the way, let us jump right in. How many of you guys like dots? I like dots. Students, this is going to be familiar to you. Up here on the screen, we have the months that an 18-year-old has left to live if they were to live to 90. That doesn't look like that many dots. And some of you are becoming quickly aware that you're not 18 anymore and that you have even less dots than expected. But this is the amount of months that an average 18-year-old has left to live. They live to 90. It's around 850-something months on the screen here. But this is kind of misleading because they're not technically awake for all those months. You see about a third of those months taken up sleeping. And then, another 126 months are taken up going to school and their career. Another 18 are spent driving. Another 36 spent cooking and eating. 36 months on chores and errands. And then, 27 months on the bathroom. We need to do what we need to do. And so that leaves the rest of the time, 334 months for you. 334 months to pursue those hobbies, to get things off of your bucket list, to enrich yourself, to grow yourself, to spend time with people you love, to spend time with the God you love, to pursue building the kingdom, to do things that have eternal reward. And I'm not saying you can't do that with some of these other things, but man, the things we really want to focus on, we really want to pour ourselves into, that's it. That's what these high schoolers have, 334 months. And so I think we can all say that our time really matters, and we don't have a lot of it. And the Bible tells us this, that our time matters, and we need to be careful with how we use our time. Ephesians 5:15-17, Paul says, "Therefore, be careful how you walk, not as unwise men, but as wise, making the most of your time." And this phrase, making the most of, it's actually one word in Greek, and it's the word redeem. Redeem your time. Buy back your time. Your time matters. And right now, there's a lot of ways we can spend our time that are not edifying, that are not good, even that are destructive, but we have the opportunity to buy it back, to redeem it, and to make it something beautiful. So don't waste your time, right? But the question then is, so how do we spend our time in a wise way? Well, there's a lot of ways that the Bible encourages us to spend our time and also encourages us to avoid with our time. But I want to provide one verse that will give us a lens, some guidelines for how we should spend our time, and that's going to apply to this conversation on technology today. The verse is 1 Corinthians 6:12, and Paul, writing to the Corinthians, says this: "All things are lawful for me, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful for me, but I will not be dominated by anything." And I want to be clear here. When Paul says all things are lawful for me, we believe he's quoting something the Corinthians would have often said. And they would say this as a way to justify spending their time however they wanted. Hey, I can do anything. I've been saved by Christ. I'm going to heaven. I can do whatever I want. It doesn't matter how I spend my time. But he says, no, it does matter. And I'm going to give you 2 guidelines. 2 ways you should evaluate how you spend your time to see if it's something worth doing. And the first, he says, man, not everything's helpful. Is what you're doing, is it helpful? And we don't know exactly what he means by helpful, but if we look at the context of the surrounding passages and how this word is used throughout Scripture, it's helpful in both a physiological sense, what's helpful for your emotional, mental, relational well-being, and also the people around you in your community, but then also helpful for your spiritual life, right? Does it grow you closer to God? Does it make you more like him? Make sense? And so that's part of the evaluative tool we use to figure out if we're spending our time well. But the second is he says, don't be dominated by anything. And this word could also be don't have anything else in authority over you. The only 2 things that should have authority over you is God is number 1, and then second, yourself. Any of your sinful desires that have control over you, other idols, these things ought not to have the power that they do. And Paul says, run from them. Paul says, do not spend your time on them. If something has authority over you, or another word we could use, you're addicted to it, this is not a way we should spend our time. All right, so we got our lens. Now what are we doing here? Ultimately, guys, we're going to be spending our time asking ourselves, do our churches and families need to get serious about our tech use? Do our churches and families need to get serious about our tech use? Does the time we spend on our technology meet these criteria that Paul has laid out? And so we're going to ask 3 questions, evaluate 3 questions to see if technology needs to be addressed in our churches and our personal lives and our families. Number 1, does it exercise authority over you? Are you addicted to it? Number 2, does it cause spiritual and physiological harm? And then number 3, does it prevent the way of the seed? And we're going to get to what that means a little later, but does it prevent the way of the seed? And I want to just say at the outset, you don't have to be convinced by all of this sermon. But if you can say yes to one of these questions, that yes, it has authority over me, or yes, it hurts me spiritually or physiologically, or even yes, it prevents me from falling the way of the seed, then technology needs to be dealt with immediately in a radical way for the sake of you, for the sake of your family, and for the sake of your church. So that's the plan this morning. And you guys know at this point, I like to say, are you all with me? And you respond with a hearty, oh yeah. So let's give that a try. Are you all with me? Let's do it. Here we go. Does technology exercise undue authority over us? Let's go back to that original image I had here. Remember the 334 months that the average high school, the 18-year-old, has left for the flex time, okay? How much of that do you think is dedicated towards technology use? Over 90% of it. Researchers and experts estimate that if they keep using at the current rate that they are, this is how much time they will spend on their phone, on Netflix, on video games. This does not count work or school screen time. This is all entertainment. That is how much of the time. And I don't know about you, but this is not what I envision my life looking like. This is not how I envision spending the rest of my free time. But I want to break this down a little bit further because you see, if we go to the average week, this breaks down to a high schooler. The average high schooler spending 40 hours per week on their technology use. That is a full work week, yes. And that's what our average high schooler is spending. If we break it down even further, let's say they have 16 hours in a day that they're awake, And if you add up all the time they spend in school, all the time they spend doing homework, and then maybe they do a sport or an extracurricular, if you add all of that time with all of their daily technology use, that is 15 hours of the 16 hours in their day gone. They have 1 hour for everything else. Okay. But this is not surprising that our youth have gotten hooked. And actually, this isn't just a problem for our youth. Many adults, we'll get to later, are equally hooked or still using in a very destructive way. But this isn't surprising. And it's not surprising because this is how the technology was designed. The first president of Facebook, Sean Parker, he said this: "Building these applications was all about how do we consume as much of your time and conscious attention as possible. We did this by exploiting a vulnerability in human psychology." And it's not just Sean Parker. If you talk to any single big mogul in Silicon Valley or programmer, these people who work on the algorithms, that's their goal. From Instagram to Facebook to TikTok, how do we get you to keep coming back to be terminally online, because they make more money that way? But at the same time, I don't want to be conspiracy theorists. I don't think these guys are evil necessarily. A lot of them, we talked about this, a lot of them really believe in what they're doing. They think if we're online more, that we're going to be healthier individuals, we're going to be more connected, we're going to be less ignorant and less hateful, we're going to be fuller. But we've had 15 years to experiment with that. And we're going to talk about if they were right in a second, if that's actually what technology is doing. But before we do, let's go back to addiction. So their goal is to, he said, manipulate a flaw in our psychology and get us to keep coming back over and over and over again. And how they did this is they modeled their technology after casinos. That's why it's often called, the phone in your pocket is called the pocket casino. So, man, I did way too much research for this, but I found about 9 different psychological tricks and tactics that casinos use to manipulate people to keep going back and spending money. And they need to do this, right? Because it doesn't make sense to go to a casino over and over and over again, because the odds are, over time, you will lose, and you will lose big, right? And so there's not much of an incentive to go over and over and over again and gamble over and over and over again, right? There's really no incentive. Okay, so how do casinos get people to go anyway? How are they so successful, even though we all know? Well, it really all comes down to that drug dopamine, that flaw, remember, that Sean Parker identified? Pretty much all of those 9 psychological tricks revolve around manipulation of dopamine. Dopamine is a drug we naturally produce. It's a drug that makes us feel good. It's a good thing, and it's supposed to be prompted in our brain when we do something that's good for us. Right? And when we find something that's good for us, it's released and it makes us want to do it again. That's a good thing. God gave it to us for a reason. But the problem is, some of these guys have found out a way to make dopamine enter your brain even when you're doing something that isn't actually good for you. And we don't have time to go into all of the ways, all of these different psychological ways that they do this. If you want to learn more, you can talk to me after. The students got to hear a couple of those. But suffice it to say, if we transfer this to technology, all of the buzzes and dings and vibrations and flashing lights and notification bells, personalized content, micro rewards, like buttons, backlogs of all of your messages and emails, YouTube shorts, Instagram reels, streaks, upvotes, and all of the rest, every single aspect of your experience online is designed to hijack your dopamine and get you coming back over and over and over again. But some of you might be thinking, okay, Jeremy, so they're trying to get me hooked, but did they succeed? I'm a pretty smart cookie. I don't think they got me. You guys want to find out if they got you? Let's see. Here's an addiction checklist. They got me, by the way, but we're going to go through this together. Dr. Justin Romano, who's a psychologist, works specifically with youth struggling with tech. This is his specialty. He developed this helpful checklist for us to figure out if we are addicted or over-relying on our technology. And here's the thing. You don't need to check all of these. He says even if several of these are true for you or for a family member, then you're most likely addicted. So let's go through these. Do you find yourself using while driving? or when it's dangerous? Do you find yourself having impaired social functioning? You find yourself isolating a little bit more, not being a little more socially anxious when you're around people? Do you have withdrawal from your phone or other technology? And this just means, do you find yourself more angry or sad or even anxious when you don't have access to your phone or video games or whatever entertainment platform you like? Do you see your use slowly creep up over time, or have you seen it creep up over time? Do you sometimes try to cut down on it, but then fail over and over again? Do you often find yourself spending more time than you planned? You promise yourself, man, just one more reel, and then you watch 50 more. Or, man, I'm just gonna watch this last show of my favorite Netflix show, and then you finish the series, okay? Do you find yourself giving up hobbies and interests in favor of use of your phone or technology? Do you find yourself constantly reaching for your phone? Honesty time, how many of you have reached for your phone at least once since I started talking? Okay. I would be in the same camp. I'm pretty boring, so no. Last one. Your use often prevents you from getting done things you need to, like homework, chores, or work. Okay, second honesty ask from you guys. Raise your hand after going through that checklist if you would qualify for at least 3 of those. I'm raising my hand because I do. Okay, I'm seeing about 50%, and statistically that's accurate. Dr. Justin says that about 97% of Americans have a smartphone, and over half of them feel addicted to it. And that's only the half that have noticed it's a problem. So it's probably a little bit higher than that are actually addicted. And this is both adults and teens. It's not just a teen problem. Okay? But there's one more issue I want to address, because some of you guys, you're thinking, okay, it's designed to be addictive. Sure, maybe I qualify as being addicted, but I don't feel like an addict. Like when we think of an addict, we think of that guy on the street corner with a needle shooting up, and he's dirty and he doesn't have a home. We're like, that's an addict. That's not me. That's not what my phone does to me. My phone makes me happy, right? Well, actually, the research shows that you have more in common with that guy on the street corner than you think. I was talking with some of the high school girls yesterday during small group time, and I asked them a question. I wanted to do a little test based on some of the research I had done, and I asked them, I'm like, raise your hand if you tend to scroll through social media or watch videos if you're tired, or if you're stressed, or if you're a little anxious, right? And all of them raised their hand. And yeah, I do that too. A lot of us do. When we're tired, when we just want to veg out, we want to relax, that's what we do, right? And so they raised their hand. But then I asked them to keep their hand raised if after they did that, after they scrolled through social media, after they watched 5, 6, 7 videos of their favorite Netflix show, how many of them felt full? How many of them felt energized? How many of them felt more at peace? You know how many hands were up in that room? 0. And this is what the studies show as well. Studies show that when people give up their technology for a day or for a week or for months, they report more happiness, they report more life satisfaction, they report less stress and less anxiety. And this is the definition of addiction. American Society of Addiction says people who use substances or engage in behaviors that become compulsive and often continue despite harmful consequences. Another way to put this is addiction is when we continually do something that doesn't actually help us but harms us, and we do it anyways. Social media, technology, video games, entertainment platforms, they don't often deliver on what you think they're going to. But your dopamine drives you to it anyways, because so many of us are hooked. So I think we've answered our first question. Does technology have undue authority over us? Are we hooked? And I think by some of the number of hands raised, most of us can honestly say yes. But it's not just addiction that's concerning. Addiction is just part of the problem. The other problem is the comorbidities that result, or the symptoms or results of being addicted. And guys, if there's any part that I really want you guys to tune into here and pay attention, it's this next point. where we asked, does it cause spiritual and physiological harm? And I want to speak to parents first and grandparents, parents and grandparents. And I want to preface this too, like, I think some of you, many of you, may not know this information, and I don't want you to beat yourself up over it, but I want this to shock you. I want this to get you motivated if you didn't know it before, because this crushed me when I read it. The World Health Organization in 2019, after 10 years of research, recommended that kids 2 and under should spend, how much do you think? How much time on technology? 0. And then 2 to 5, they said they could spend an hour, but it should only be educational. And then 5 to 18, they still recommended significant and strict control of their use. But why? Why is it so important? I mean, so many of us have kids, and it's nice sometimes to just let them, we're busy and we just let them go on their phone, on their iPad. We don't want them to distract others, or, we're just feeling really tired. Like, what's the big deal? It doesn't seem to hurt them, right? Here's the reason why. Gloria Mark, a PhD in psychology and digital media, she works over at Princeton, and she's kind of the leading voice in this area, researching what technology use does to kids. She said this in an interview. The problem is that when children are very young, there are certain parts of their brain that are not yet mature. So their ability to self-control, to self-regulate, things like decision-making and setting priorities of what we should pay attention to is not there. Children's executive function is not yet well developed, and children are sitting in front of screens and they're exposed to all kinds of potential distractions. So I think this is not a good idea to do for your child. Children need self-control for learning. And she goes on, this is the important part, listen to this. She argues that giving kids screen time from a young age hurts their brain's ability to learn how to concentrate, how to develop social skills, their creativity, and then their self-control later in life, which can lead to further addiction in other areas. And guys, this isn't just with young kids. This is also, like I was talking about, with young adults, with our high schoolers. Even me, I'm 26, my brain hasn't even fully developed yet. I'm technically still more susceptible to addiction than some of the rest of you. And I want to show you another graph to prove this. How many of you, before I do, how many of you know when the first iPhone came out? Someone shout it out for me. 2008, 2007. And I'm going to show you a study that was done on young adults' mental health between 2008 and 2017, and this is what they found. That student depression, anxiety, and suicidal ideation rose by over 40% between 2008 and 2017. Is it a coincidence that the iPhone came out a year before? And honestly, I hate when people do that, like they take, oh, look, this thing happened right when this thing happened. See, this one caused it, right? No, we need a little more information than that. We need a little more critical thinking. And guess what? The guy who who did this study in the Journal of Abnormal Psychology, he quoted this in the conclusion. He said, I believe that this trend we are seeing is partially due to an increased use of electronic communication and digital media. But I want you to notice one other really scary thing. Did any of the adults' anxiety and depression rise over that period? No. But so many of you have had your life changed by technology. Maybe some of you joined Facebook for the first time in 2012 and now you're hooked. Maybe Instagram in 2015. Maybe now you're watching Netflix with your spouse every single night. And maybe you just raised your hand a second ago and say, yeah, I'm addicted. So why are you guys not facing a similar increase? It goes back to the fact that your kids' brains are more susceptible to addiction and more susceptible to the negative effects than yours are. And when you allow them to have something that's so addictive, it can and will change them irreversibly. And the research is still coming out about all of the ways it is harming our children. And I want to give you one more, this one makes me so sad. I want to give you one more area that technology is messing with our kids. Have you guys heard, raise your hands if you've heard ADHD is on the rise in our children. How many of you have heard that? Okay, that is wrong. ADHD is a condition you're born with, It's not something you can develop later in life. But the reason it looks like ADHD is on the rise is because people are incorrectly self-diagnosing themselves or going to medical professionals who don't actually have, the ability to properly diagnose you. And the reason this is happening is because many kids are addicted to social media and technology, and the symptoms they experience look exactly like the symptoms of those who have ADHD, okay? And this looks like trouble concentrating for long periods of time, restlessness, trouble organizing and managing tasks, and impulsivity. And this is the thing that makes me sad. Some of your kids, you might say about some of your kids, let's say your 13-year-old, your 14-year-old, man, they don't like people. They're just social anxious. They're just an introvert. That's just who they are. That's just who they are. But it might not be. They might be able to develop real and deep connection with people. They might be a kind of person who would love to go to a party and connect with others, but they've never gotten the chance to experience what God gave them, how God wired them, because technology has altered who they are. Your kid might not just be like an ADHD crazy monster bouncing off of walls, never being able to concentrate. They might be someone who's actually very thoughtful. They might be someone who actually has the brain power and the capacity to sit down and to focus, but they don't even know it because they've never had the opportunity to live without an addiction. And the list can go on and on and on. How many of our kids are not really our kids right now? How many of our kids are not stepping into and living in a way that God created them and designed them because they've had an addiction since birth, or from 7 or 8 or 9 or 10? That's what makes me sad. But guys, this doesn't just hurt our youth and our kids. Remember, we said we're asking the question, does technology cause spiritual or physiological damage or harm? And we've seen, it hurts our kids, but I think it affects all of us, or many of us rather, in 2 other ways. It hurts our concentration, and then it also hurts our ability to love. Let's tackle the concentration one first. Concentration. Turns out that the all-important and revered value of multitasking is not very good for us. In fact, those who switch between tasks really frequently report more stress, less work productivity, and less, you guessed it, overall concentration and focus. In fact, there was researchers have found that for you to get into flow state, if you've heard of flow state, when you're like really locked in, when your brain is firing on all of its cylinders and you're your most productive, okay? That takes about 15 to 25 minutes to get into when you start a task. And researchers have found that a distraction, as simple as your phone buzzing or a notification going off, even if you don't pick it up, that is enough to break you out of flow state and take another 15 to 25 minutes to get back into. And you know how much the average adult checks their phone? 150 times a day. So I don't know how much we're actually ever in flow state. We're actually doing our best work or concentrating fully on something. But honestly, that's a minor issue compared to the next thing I'm going to bring up with concentration. This is something we didn't talk with the students about over the weekend, so this is brand new information. And this one scares me in particular. The Bereans in Acts 17:11, they were this Jewish group that Paul brought the gospel to. And Luke, who writes Acts, he actually calls them the noble Bereans. Why does he call them the noble Bereans? Well, he calls them noble because they received the gospel with excitement, which is great, but there's something else they did. When Paul brought them the gospel, they didn't just accept it wholesale. It says they went to the word and studied it daily to see if what he was saying was true, right? They focused, they were thoughtful, they spent time analyzing the information they were receiving so that they could correctly form their beliefs and opinions and worldviews. Right? This is a good thing. We recognize this. But here's the scary thing. It takes diligence, focus, time, and critical thinking to be informed, but many experts are concerned we are losing the ability to do so. In the seminal work, Amusing Ourselves to Death, that was written in 1985 by Neil Postman, and this book, by the way, is hailed as like a prophetic book, just predicting what our time right now would be experiencing. And man, he was right on the money. He says this about his time and what he thought would continue to happen into our time today. He says this: what is happening here is that television is altering the meaning of being informed by creating a species of information that might properly be called disinformation. And now, listen to this. He's very clear here. Disinformation does not mean false information or fake news, although that is a problem on our social media platforms and how we get news, right? But he's like, that's not even the big problem, fake news. The big problem is it means misleading information. There's misleading information, misplaced, irrelevant, fragmented, or superficial information being received en masse. When I say television news shows entertains but do not inform, I am saying something far more serious than that we are being deprived of authentic information. I am saying, listen to this, I am saying we are losing our sense of what it means to be well-informed. Do you see the difference? It's not that we're ignorant of what's going on, it's that we are ignorant and think that we know. And he continues, he says this: ignorance is always correctable, but what shall we do if we mistake ignorance for knowledge? And think about how social media and news and even our politics, how we get our information. We get them in sound bites, in sentences, in memes, in tweets, in shorts. We follow our favorite social media influencer that we haven't even looked into the background of, but we just like the vibe of, and they agree with us. And so we believe everything they tell us without critically thinking about it or evaluating it for ourselves or going out and doing the legwork and the research. You know, the average time spent on a news article is 15 seconds. Most people read the headlines and then one or two sentences after. And that's for people who even read news articles. Yet so many of us think we are so informed that we know everything about our side and everything about the other side, and we're informed enough to get really angry at the other side, right? And we're going to talk about anger in a second, and hatred and division. But guys, this is a huge spiritual problem. The only reason Jesus was able to combat Satan when Satan brought scripture to him was why? Because he had a great breadth and depth of knowledge. And I'm concerned most of us do not have the same breadth and depth of knowledge that Jesus had, and that we're even losing it as time goes on. So that when Satan attacks us with false messaging, when he sends us misleading information, we are not equipped to deal with it. And so our beliefs and our opinions and our worldviews begin to be more and more grounded in untruth and unreality in a skewed way. But I want to talk about one more thing. I know. Are we still hanging in there? We good? Can I get a thumbs up if we're still awake? Okay. I know this is so much information, but this is all so good. And oh my gosh, I want to get through all of it. Okay. Love. Technology prevents us, keeps us disconnected from love. What do I mean by that? There were two really, I think, New York Times best-selling books. I read one of them, The Chaos Machine, but the other one is The Outrage Machine. And these books, for many years, interviewed top Silicon Valley officials and businessmen, the guys, the programmers that developed the algorithms, and they were getting information about how Facebook and Instagram, these other social media sites work, what content they push, and what gets the most views and attention. And Facebook researchers, one of the things that they said in this book is that Facebook researchers in 2018, so people Facebook hired, they found that our algorithms exploit the human brain's attraction to divisiveness. The platform pumps more and more divisive content in an effort to gain user attention and increase time on the platform. What they found actually is that hateful, divisive, or outrageous content spread 20% more rapidly than anything else. And you think Facebook did something about it? They said they did, but then another study was conducted in 2020 and assessed that things had just gotten worse and people were pushed further into their echo chambers of hatred and division. So there's two possibilities. Either they tried to fix their algorithms and they have no idea what they're doing, and their algorithms have gotten away from them, or they don't really care. And I want to be fair to them too, because I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I don't think all of these guys are out to get us. And in fact, if you read these books and you hear these interviews, these Silicon Valley like moguls give, they really believe in this stuff. They're like, man, if we can get people more and more online, we're going to be more connected. We're going to be healthier. We're going to see a decrease in mental health. We're going to see people come together. It's going to be beautiful if we can all just be online as much as they say these things. But I think we're only like a little over halfway through the sermon, and I think we're already realizing they were just dead wrong, at least with what we're doing right now. But I want to talk about a couple ways that this happens. So I mentioned that division, hatred, outrage, it sells. And the most clicked videos and articles tend to be this kind of caption. It's when your group, the group you identify with, your in-group, is dunking on the other people. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, this might ring a bell. Ben Shapiro destroys woke idiot. Okay, have we seen titles like this? Yes. Have we even clicked on some of these? Okay, or even the opposite, right? We have someone, like Ezra Klein from the Democratic side, screws up these dumb Trump supporters or whatever, right? And this is the stuff that sells, and this is the stuff that we click on, and it travels fast. And what it does is it causes more and more division between people who are already struggling to connect. And it creates more and more space with hatred and outrage and disgust between people that we're supposed to love. Are we supposed to have distance with anyone because of hatred as Christians? No. We're actually supposed to shrink the distance through love and forgiveness and prayer. But man, so much of the content that I know I've consumed in the past, and I know so many of you consume, do not promote shortening the distance. All it does is aggravate it. But there's one more thing. There's one more way that I think this divisiveness and hatred hurts us. And that's that it skews our perception of reality. How many of you guys have heard of Matt Walsh? Matt Walsh, he's getting kind of famous now. He works for the Daily Wire, which is kind of like a conservative news outlet. And a couple years ago, and I promise I'm not getting political, this is just an example, all right? He worked for a conservative news outlet, and he did this study where he created this documentary where he was going around looking at like transgender issues and gender dysphoria and hormone replacement and all this stuff. And he did years of research, and he talked with all of these people in this area. And he shows up on the Joe Rogan podcast a little, I think, after this documentary airs. And Rogan asks him, he's like, hey man, Matt, you've been doing this for years. You're the expert on this topic. He's like, how many kids get hormone replacement in the US every year? How many? And Matt is like, man, millions. And if you've seen Joe Rogan's podcast at all, he likes researching things like while he's interviewing people. And so he's like, let's look it up. And so they research it. It was 4,500 in the last year, 5 years. 4,500 students getting hormone replacement in the last 5 years. And I'm not trying to talk about the issue. All I'm trying to say is that Matt Walsh was so invested. His whole world was invested in the fringe. His whole world was invested in this issue to the point that when he was asked to speak on how prevalent he thought this issue was, he was magnitudes off. He wasn't even close, right? And I think this is something that happens to all of us is as we get more and more into our echo chambers, more and more into this divisive hatred thing, we start to think there's more and more of our enemies out there, there's more and more of the crazies out there than there really are, and there's more and more distance between us and them as people than there really is. And man, that is scary. Because we are just building wall after wall after wall that's making it harder and harder to get to the other side and to love our neighbor as Christ would have us do. And so we've got two checks now. Technology does exercise too much authority on so many of us, and it does cause spiritual and physiological harm to far too many of us. But we have one more question we'd like to ask, and how does this, our use of technology, prevent the way of the seed? This is a short point, I promise, but it perhaps is the most important one. Romans 12, 1 through 2 says this: I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. So do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. 3 phrases I want to break down here. First, Paul calls us to be living sacrifices when it comes to our life with God. This means what we think, what we speak, what we do, and all of the resources around us, we are to lay at the feet of Christ. And I think if we're being honest with ourselves, if our use looks anything like that graph I showed you, 90% of that free time being used by entertainment and technology, I don't think we're sacrificing much at all for Christ. I don't think we're even coming close to living sacrifice. And Paul continues and he says, man, the thing that I'm most concerned about that's going to get in the way of you being a living sacrifice is you slowly conforming to this world. And man, what does the world want us to conform to right now? The fact that 97% of adults have a smartphone. Everybody has it. Everybody's on social media. Everyone watches Netflix. And man, this causes FOMO, fear of missing out. We don't want to miss out on our friends' posts. We don't want to miss out on that new episode of our favorite show. We don't want to miss out on what our favorite content creator put out. We don't want to miss out. And so we conform. And so we go back. But eventually, without us even realizing it, we're not choosing to conform anymore. We're forced to. We're not willingly conforming. We're now addicted. And so conforming to the pattern of this world keeps us from being living sacrifices. And then so Paul gives this last bit of advice. He says, transform and renew your mind. And this isn't even like a great translation. It's hard to like put this into the words in Greek because it's not just about being able to identify, he says, what is good, what God's will is, what's good and beautiful, the ways we should use our time, the things we should pursue, right? It's not just about identifying it, but it's about having a heart that's so in love with it that we have the motivation to pursue it. And the problem is that so many of us, so many of our youth are so locked in, are so conformed, so addicted, that even if they see the good they ought to do, they cannot pursue it. I want to give a quote from John Owens here. He says, the growth of trees and plants takes place so slowly that it is not easily seen. Daily we notice little changes, but in a course of time we see that a great change has taken place, and so it is with grace. Sanctification is a progressive, lifelong work. This is the way of the seed I was talking about. John Owens recognizes that when it comes to renewing our minds, to helping us to grow closer to the divine, to figure out what is good and what is beautiful, and then to grow in a love for it. It's not a race. It's not a sprint. It's not something we can consume all at once. It is a slow, daily, moment by moment, intentional watering, receiving sunlight, and abiding with your roots. It takes time, daily, intentionally, in the small moments and in the big moments, to allow God to speak to you and to grow in Him. But here's the concern. At most of our current technology use, we have no ability to pursue the way of the seed. The moments that we used to have, where we genuinely, our attention was open and available for God to speak to us, was open and available for us to look at ourselves and figure out where we were going and why we were going that direction. The time that we used to have to look around us and see how those around us were doing and how we could better support them and encourage them. The time we had to behold what God was doing around us in his nature and in those around us. We don't have that anymore. We're missing it because every free time we have, it's straight to here. We're not growing daily with God inch by inch. We hope that we can get it all out of the way on Sundays. We can get it all out of the way during our morning devotions. And then the rest, we're going to remain locked in on our tech. That is not the way of the seed. That is not the way of sanctification. And so after all of this, does technology exercise authority? Absolutely. Does it cause spiritual and physiological harm? Absolutely. Does it prevent us from following the way of the seed, from growing in sanctification bit by bit by being open to what God is doing around us and in us? Yes. And so what do we do with this? I have a couple application points for you. Number one, if you are a parent or a grandparent who has some influence, please get rid of your kids' personal screens, especially if they're between 0 and 5. They do not need it. They don't need a TV in the room, they don't need an iPad, and they certainly don't need a phone in their hand. For your older kids, or if it's just really, maybe you're a single mom and it's just not feasible, you really just can't, you know it's destructive, but you try to limit it, but you just can't give all of it up, then at least limit it. And limit all of it. We had a student share his testimony and his battle with addiction the other night. And he was saying what he found is he was most addicted to YouTube. And so what he did is he deleted YouTube and got rid of that, but then he just switched to Instagram. And then he deleted Instagram and he switched to TikTok. And so it's not enough to just get rid of your kid's favorite video game or get rid of your kid's favorite show or to set time limits on it. You need to do it for everything because it's all meant to be addictive and they're just going to go to the next easiest thing. Limit it all. Number 3, this is probably the most radical. I did it for a couple months and then I broke. Consider getting a flip phone. Actually, I didn't even do it willingly. I was on a trip with the youth, and I had my iPhone in my pocket, and we were on a roller coaster, and it fell out. And so I had to get a dumb phone for a little bit, and it was the hardest thing I ever did. But man, it was good. 4th, delete social media. This one's going to be hard, and I wish I had more time to talk about why you can. That was going to be the last part of my sermon. We don't have time for it because I know some of your first reaction is, no, I can't. I literally cannot do that. I'm part of groups that I get notifications from. I get event information from. I need to be, that's how I communicate with some of my best friends. And those are good things. Like, I'm not saying they're bad things, but I think if you thought about it deeply enough, most of us could still do without social media and we'd be just fine. And I think if we balance the amount of harm that it costs, the amount of good that it does us day to day, I think at the end of the day, deleting is the best choice. And one more thing on this topic, social media could be a good thing. But as we've seen today, the algorithms don't let it be a good thing. They pump more bad than good into our communities, into our churches, and into our families. And so one of the only ways we can get Facebook and Instagram and TikTok to change is if we protest them by stopping. Because, oh man, I went after case after case. There was this, real quick aside, we talked about Myanmar, which was formerly Burma. Facebook got exclusive rights to all of their phones, and they downloaded Facebook on all of their phones, and in 3 years, Myanmar had a meltdown. And it was all because of Facebook and misinformation and hate that was spread, and people were getting killed, businesses were being burned, and the country was yelling at Facebook, help, stop, we're literally dying here. We need you to fix something. And they didn't fix anything. They didn't even reach back out until Myanmar shut off Facebook remotely on their end. And then Facebook said, hey, what's going on? Now that their revenue's not coming in anymore. And so if you want these big companies to change, if you want them to be healthier for you and me, it's not going to happen unless we stop giving them what they want. Number 5, build white space. I talked about how the way of the seed happens when we're more aware, when our attention isn't constantly focused on something, when we can be aware of the small whisper of God's voice and aware of the ways that the people around us need us. But so many of us don't even know what it is to have empty space, white space. And so if that's a struggle for you, especially if you're a high schooler, if you're like, oh, that sounds scary, being bored for 20 minutes, like what do I do with that? What do I do being on a drive, not listening to music or a podcast? I struggle with this. I talked to some of the girls about it. I listen to podcasts everywhere I go. Consider starting small, build in a little bit of white space. 6, if you're a parent or a grandparent, please walk the talk. If you're gonna take your kids' phones and iPads and video games and TV away, and you're gonna tell them how bad it is for them, but then you're gonna sit at the dining room table while you're eating dinner on your phone, and while your kids are playing and asking you to play with them, you're sitting there on your phone. We're not sending the best message to our kids. And then finally, man, just pray for us all. This is probably gonna take decades, if not a century, to change. Cigarettes had a similar but not quite as broad of acceptance right back in the 1950s. And actually one of our students brought up, it's not until recently, really within the last decade or two, that our culture has shifted its opinion on it to the point where use is down significantly. And I think technology use right now is far more ingrained than cigarettes ever were. And so if it took 50 years for cigarettes, it's gonna take a long time for this. And so the only thing we can really do is pray for our culture, our country, our churches, our families, because it's gonna take a whole heck of a lot of time without the power of the Spirit. So I have one more question for you guys as we close. This is the time that you have left if you're 18. If you're 40 or 60 or 70, it is far less, but it is still equally valuable. What are you gonna let spend that time? Let's pray. Heavenly Father, as we just prayed this morning, we call upon the chain breaker, the one who is in control of all, who breaks every addiction, who breaks every sin, who breaks every idol, who does what we are so often incapable of doing. Because Lord, as we look at this problem that's so pervasive and so far-reaching and has gotten a hold of us and gotten a hold of our kids and gotten a hold of our churches and our families, it just seems overwhelming. We don't know where to start. And so we need you. I don't have anything else, Lord, except just to plea that you would have mercy on us and you would break us free from that which holds us down. We pray this in your name. Amen. Thank you guys for hanging in there. You guys can leave. Be blessed.
Welcome back to the studio. We are now joined by Jeremy McGrath. Glad you're here.
Glad to be here.
Wow, what a message. It's one that I'm going to have to go back and give a re-listen to. And you told us earlier this morning at staff meeting that when you were working on it Saturday, so the day before you delivered it, like it was 2 hours and it could have been longer.
Yes.
That would have been an interesting thing. We would have had to take an intermission, go get some donuts and coffee, come back. But what kinds of things did you have to omit as you narrowed down for Sunday?
Yeah, there was a lot of stuff. And honestly, thankfully, most of the stuff I cut were just extra information, extra details within the buckets that we covered, you know, that the social media and technology use, or overuse rather, can disconnect us from loving our neighbor, can disconnect us from concentration or being able to create worldviews and beliefs that are grounded, you know, on good information. And then even, you know, not causing us to be addicted and not giving us the social validation or the social connection that we expect. So I wanted to hit a couple others then today that I think might be helpful to, you know, to those of us who do have social media or who do have iPhones, so we can begin to identify the ways that they may trick our brain into spending more time than we would normally like to on it. And I wanted to start with the term keyboard warrior. We didn't get into this, but we've all heard the term, many of us have heard the term keyboard warrior, the person who goes onto Facebook or goes onto Twitter, or now X, and is in the comment section all the time, you know, trying to destroy the other side and counteract the other side and then defend their side, right, on whatever the issue is. And
Is this like going on comments and just commenting or finding things or threads and that kind of thing to like push your agenda or whatever, that kind of thing?
Yeah, it can be going on like finding opponents' threads or comments and commenting on them. But more often we find that it will be hopping into a group that you're part of that agrees with you and then sharing a video or sharing a quote from the other side that everyone in your group can kind of jump in on and tear apart.
Add to the collective goal of that group.
Yes.
Yeah, mission.
And I mentioned the name for this briefly in the sermon, but this is what we call echo chambers. These groups tend to be groups where everyone agrees, and because they all agree, they become more and more cemented in their side and more against the other side. And this tends to lead to less and less nuance. They are 100% right and the other side is 100%
There's no
wrong.
critical thought or thinking about they could be wrong or anything that way.
Sure. So, sometimes there is, but very, very rarely, especially when a group starts to get a little bit more extreme, you begin to know that if I post something that might sound sympathetic to the other side, it's not going to go over well, right? And so this kind of idea of like group conformity starts to kick in. But this even happens within our friend groups. I mean, some of you can think of the last 6, 7, 8 years of how many friends you've lost because you were on a different part of the political spectrum or you're a different religion. And so what ends up happening is your friend groups begin to become your own echo chamber because all of your friends tend to agree with you.
I gotcha.
Right?
Yeah, I gravitate
Or you
to
might
people.
mute somebody who consistently posts things that
Right.
just make your skin crawl.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Which
And
then-
to some extent that is healthy sometimes. And sometimes you just really can't take that, ant who just
Yes.
really gets under your skin every single day. But at the same time, while we're running away from those people, we're exposing ourselves to another potential harm, and that is the echo chamber. And so I want to spend a couple minutes just talking about again, this keyboard warrior phenomenon, how Facebook and Instagram and X have created algorithms that push content that are divisive to make us feel like soldiers at the front line of a battle. So I had mentioned that divisive content gets pushed or outrageous content, which is disgust plus hatred. That's what outrage means, at least to the algorithm. It gets pushed.
Discuss plus hatred.
Disgust plus hatred equals outrage. So if we see
okay.
something that we're disgusted with and we hate, then it creates within us outrage.
Strong emotional outpouring. Yeah.
And outrage makes us want to be online. Researchers have found more than any other emotion.
Wow.
If we feel outrage at something, then we want to be soldiers. We want to fight against it, right? And so this is why things like fake news, or like I said, not even fake news, but just news that's not quite nuanced, that doesn't have all the details, that's out of context a little bit.
It was very interesting. I'm not sure if this is exactly what we were talking about in this point, but it was interesting to me. I can't remember the person you said it was, but like they believed this would be like hundreds of thousands or millions of people this affected, and it was like 4,000 in the whole country or world
for the last 5 years.
For the last 5 years, and that's kind of, I mean, that was eye opening to me. It's like, man, what kind of things do I kind of latch onto and just blindly maybe even think is true, without even really checking it out,
or especially with health related things these days. And I think, clearly 2020 made this just, I believe, made it skyrocket. I shouldn't say things I don't know for sure, but I would assume that we are seeing more posts that say research has shown, or there's a new research study that shows this. And we're not going to probably take the time to go read even the abstract, let alone the entire paper or the publication that it was released in. We're just going to take
bill that
we're
has
gonna,
been signed into.
We're going to take the top line that was shared in that social post and assume that it must be true.
Well, and here's the scary part about this. It's not even just that we're not taking time to dig into the research studies that show up in our feed. It's that most of the research studies or the facts that show up in your feed are outrageous, are things that make us shocked, are things that make us hate the other side. Right. I mean, think about the last time, if you're, let's say if you're a Republican, okay, think about the last time in your feed, you saw someone post a study that showed, Democrats and Republicans kind of agree over this issue overall, or let's see, another Republican issue. Let's say it's on immigration. When's the last time you saw a study that said immigrants aren't committing very many crimes? Right. And then on the other side of this, spectrum, when was the last time as a Democrat you saw something that was positive about Trump? When was the last time you saw something? Right. And I think what we see is that the outrageous, the stuff that gets us going, that's the stuff we're seeing, and we're not seeing the nuanced stuff. And then that begins to warp our perception of how things are. Right?
And like what you said is that it definitely does not create any middle ground or coming together. It pushes people polar opposites.
Correct.
And
yes.
I like the idea of that we can all come to agree on the things at least we can agree on, but this seems to be pushing the opposite way.
And let me add one more final thing on this, and then a story to kind of close out this part. One of the things this does to us, and we know this psychologically, when we begin to see outrageous content of the other over and over and over again, just like Matt Walsh, who you were referencing, who believed there were millions of kids who were getting hormone replacement therapy. We begin to think everyone on the other side has all of the evil qualities and evil inclinations that some of the fringe people we've seen, on our posts show up frequently.
Extreme people,
correct.
All of them think
that all of the most extreme we've seen on the other side represent the majority. And then we also begin to think that there is only evil within the other side, and there's no pure motivation. I mean, again, if you're a Republican, can you name one positive thing you heard about Kamala Harris? One positive motivation or thing you heard about Kamala Harris over the course of, and if you can't, most likely you have a very unnuanced and even untrue and and biased description within your news feed. And I'm going to give a story on the other side, the Democratic side. There was an article I was reading, a woman, I think it was New York Times, and it was an opinion piece, and she was talking about her neighbor. And she had this fury for her neighbor because her neighbor had a Trump sign in his yard. And she was, she began to associate all of the evil things that she was
afraid of her neighbor.
And hated her neighbor. Because he was a Trump. She didn't know him very well, and she admitted that, but she began to associate all of these evil things with this man because he was a Trump supporter. But then one day she saw him go and mow his other neighbor's lawn, who was an elderly lady. And she was talking about her internal dialogue, and she's like, man, he seems to be doing, something really kind and, and very, very nice. And she's like, she's trying to reconcile this. And instead of doing the obvious thing with maybe there's some good within him, even though we disagree on some core things, it was, she just said, and it just goes to show you, the lengths at which evil people will try to put up facades to make themselves look better. That was her conclusion.
Wow.
And that's what social media does to us, because if we are so convinced the other side is evil and there's nothing redeemable in them, and they have only evil intent for our country, for our culture, for our families, or whatever, then we will reinterpret any good things that we see as having negative motivations.
I didn't think much about it then, but the Value Them Both campaign.
Yeah,
I had in my Facebook feed, and since I'm in my 40s, that's really the only social media that I know how to use. But there would be pictures of signs there was Value Them Both, and then there was a campaign against it, right?
Yes.
And so I had in my feed almost every day during that time of people would post signs that value them both, and look at how hatred runs, or and just on both sides though. And I was just that's just interesting. And it was just the pictures of the signs in the yard.
Yes.
That was how they decided that things were good or bad.
Yeah.
So social media encourages us seeing this content, this outrageous content, which is going to make us hate the other side more and more and more. It encourages a skewed view of reality, and it decreases our ability to see that there's good in other people that we disagree with. Yeah. And there's way more we could say on that, but I think that's a good kind of synopsis of that. Let's skip over. We were going to talk about group identity and how we form our values based on emotions, but let's skip that for now. I wanted to go back to the parents and kids for a second. And we didn't talk about this beforehand.
Me being a parent,
yeah,
that would be very valuable.
Yeah. Well, and to me, so my daughter is almost 2, and thankfully she doesn't like screens. So even if we have something on, she doesn't watch. But if she did, it would not be good. Like, let's just say we let her. Yeah.
That is not the experience I've had with my kids.
Yeah. And I think most kids.
It's an area that, and now that my son is turning 24, I would like to have handled differently.
Sure.
Way differently.
Well, but I feel bad for so many parents because this is brand new. It's 15 years. And like the World Health Organization recommendation didn't come out till 2019. And we were learning some of these things beforehand, but like some of these parents didn't even have a chance, right? They didn't know there was this information was available. Also, I didn't mention this, but another sad thing is is it the DSM-3? 5? I think it's 5 now. Is it 3?
Okay. I thought.
I can't. I could be wrong. Don't quote me on this, but yeah, essentially the psychological handbook of addictions and psychological.
What is DSM is
Diagnostic and Statistical Manual.
Okay.
It's what doctors and psychologists use to diagnose.
Yeah, different mental conditions.
Okay, I got you.
Yeah. And I have just read a book that was written in the late 20-teens, and they were referencing the DSM-3, and so I think that's why that's top of my mind. I think you're probably right.
I can't remember. It's between 3 and 5, somewhere there.
Maybe
the latest edition.
From 3 to 5.
Right. So the latest edition, it still does not contain an official. How the psychologist I was reading, actually Justin Romano, who I mentioned, he said it still doesn't contain a coding or a definition for technology addiction. He said everyone in his field recognizes it's a thing, but this makes it problematic because doctors cannot write prescriptions for it. Doctors cannot diagnose children with it officially because insurances won't cover it unless it's coded. So we're also hurting our ability to even address it as a society because
you're talking about technology addiction?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So again, it's not saying technology addiction isn't a thing. It's that we are still in the process of studying it and figuring out how it manifests so that we can properly diagnose it.
There's not an official treatment for it.
Exactly. Yes. And since there's none of those things have been fully developed, our society can't really even start tackling it, at least our professionals, our medical professionals.
Though I did think it was interesting in the sermon you mentioned that we may be even misdiagnosing it as ADHD.
Yes.
Right. And this is what I wanted to talk about because there was another aspect of this. So I said in the sermon that ADHD is not technically on the rise. It's misdiagnosis of ADHD as tech addiction, right? But I wanted to say one thing to parents who do have ADHD children, because there's still a substantial amount. We have some in our ministry. I have some in my family. Actually, Caroline herself is ADHD. She was officially diagnosed, my wife. And researchers have found that those who actually have ADHD are significantly more at risk of developing a technology addiction, and it actually
that was the case of our son.
Yes,
it could make it worse.
Increasing the symptoms drastically versus someone who doesn't have it. So just an extra warning to parents, especially those of you who have ADHD kids, technology use is probably one of the worst things for your kid. That's uninhibited, right? With no control or guidelines in place for them. Let's jump to relationships, and then we'll see how much time we have for some of the psychological tricks
and
social media uses.
We want to hear more of the solutions and recommendations.
We'll wrap up with that.
Let's give some time to that.
Okay, for sure. Well, okay. So we talked about social media. The whole goal overall for us as users is to connect with people. It's to form deeper, better relationships, to keep in touch with people that are distant, to feel more connected to their day-to-day life through the pictures and posts, right? And that's a good thing.
I also use it to buy very cheap things on the internet. So
sure, Facebook Marketplace. There are other uses.
Tools and cars and whatever else.
We are, let's pivot to the Bible. We were created for relationships.
Yes.
Connection.
And it kind of helps. It's supposed to help scratch that itch of wanting to connect with others, and grandparents see the photos of the grandkids on vacation so they can keep up with it.
Absolutely.
So the good uses of it there.
Yes. And honestly, this is one of the reasons social media succeeds so much at capturing our attention, because God created us with a real need. And when we find real social connection, dopamine is released.
Yeah.
And God intended for that to happen because he wants us to find and sustain
It's
and
like a
pursue
reward for
being
godly. Yeah.
So we're going to talk about two things. First, we're going to talk about how sometimes our overuse of technology hurts face-to-face relationships and developing face-to-face relationships. And then we're going to talk about how it doesn't often or always deliver that social connection we think it will.
Yes.
So first, researchers in 2013 did a study where they got strangers together and they put them into a conversation with one other person. And they had two different groups. They had one group that was given a question to consider and to discuss, and it was a question that was meant to delve into the other person's life and get to know them in a substantive way. And the other group, given the exact same question, the only difference is they had their phones out on the table. And I can't remember if it was face down or face up, but the phone was on the table. They were told they were not supposed to check their phones, but just keep it on the table. And researchers found at the end of the study that the group that had the discussion with someone with the phone on the table reported that the other person was less empathetic, less trustworthy, and not as good of a listener, even though...
And they really didn't check it.
Even though they didn't check, even though they didn't even check their phone.
To it.
Exactly. And so even having a phone out can get our brains thinking that this person doesn't care as much about me. And I think the reason is linked to the phenomena of, colloquially it's called phubbing, which is when you're on the phone, you're talking with someone, but you're texting or you're scrolling, right? And you're phubbing them. Yeah.
I did not know that.
Say that again?
What it's called.
Phubbing, Phubbing.
All right.
Yeah. Phone snubbing. When you're snubbing someone with a phone.
Thank you.
Yes.
So if I'm talking to someone and then they just start going, oh yeah, huh?
Right.
Like,
yes. And so when that happens, someone truly is not doing as good of a job at listening and connecting and being empathetic and right. But our brain is now associating the phone, even just seeing the phone, with a person not caring as much about you.
Disrespect or disengagement.
And disengagement. Yeah. And the research is still new on this, but I wonder how much harder it is, especially for our youth, to form face-to-face relationships because of how much the phone plays, how much role phone plays in blocking the development of that. So that's something to consider. But let's go to actually being on social media. Okay, so being on social media and getting that connection that we desire. One of the things that gets us most excited when we log into social media are the likes on our posts and the notification bells, right? Okay, and that was designed that way.
As a content creator,
yes.
you also that's what you're supposed to be doing.
Right. And when you log on, you get a dopamine hit when you see 4 new messages or notifications with 74 people liked your post. Okay. And that gives you dopamine and you get excited.
Or even like you're tagged in this post or you know, that's what on Facebook it has those things. Even if you don't post, you're still getting notifications like this person wants to talk to you. This person wants to, like, oh, they do. Like,
well, and so actually that's another trick is like how many times have you logged onto Facebook or Instagram and you click on the heart or the notification bell because it has 15 new notifications. You get excited, but like half of them are your great aunt posted for the first time in 3 months. And you're like, oh,
you have an event that you might be interested in your area in the next 3 months.
Yes. And so that alone is trying to like get you excited for no real reward. Okay. But let's talk about, let's say someone does really like your post. A bunch of people really do like your post and or someone comments on it. Okay. What from a personal standpoint, why is that meaningful to us? What are we looking for when we get excited about a like or a comment?
It feels like affirmation.
Yeah, affirmation.
Validation.
You have value more. I mean, what you've done has value, or
people like me.
or who you are has value.
Right. Yeah. Social validation and encouragement. Okay. Mark Zuckerberg was resistant to the like button for a very, very long time because he felt like it would prevent people from meaningfully interacting with each other's posts. Because meaningful social interaction is when we thoughtfully engage with one another.
Like type that comment, like actual comment on
Sure.
there even.
And sometimes even the comments aren't very thoughtful, but we'll get to that. But
Yeah.
so he did that. But then when they did introduce the like button, use skyrocketed. Okay.
There was
so,
also,
yeah.
I am 95% sure when Facebook first came out, there was also a dislike button.
there
Which
might
is
have been.
now,
Yeah.
Which is now
Yeah.
the angry
The angry emoji.
now there's
emoji.
a lot of
Yeah.
responses.
Yeah,
You can,
there's a lot
you
of
can
things you can
accidentally,
say. But it was
instead of caring, you can
like or
laugh.
dislike.
Yeah. So,
Interesting that went away.
yeah, right.
Then it came back.
And then it came back. Yeah. And sometimes in other forms.
Well,
With
my
that.
big fingers, I accidentally.
Yeah.
Well, instead of caring,
Oh, no.
laugh, and I'm like, "Oh no, you're laughing at someone dying or something."
no.
Like, that's
It
like
happens almost
Yeah.
Oh,
once
goodness.
a week with the
Right.
sermon video. Like,
Yes.
you know someone's thumb has slipped and
Yeah.
they've hit the angry
if
because
it was
it
me,
was
it's just my.
it was during
big
a
It's just
song.
Jason.
Just
Like,
me
it was
trying to
just
get
you.
my thumbs to work on
Oh,
there,
big fingers.
not thumbing you.
All
Right. So ultimately, though, if we think about it, if we think about the like button and how we use the like button, most people are not liking something that they think is particularly creative or particularly wonderful or particularly awesome. They just like you scroll through Facebook and Instagram and you like your friends' photos, because they're your friends.
Yeah,
Right.
it's almost
went to-
obligatory.
Right.
Like you
Oh.
almost like, oh,
Yeah.
if I don't like my
Exactly.
friends, like I like other ones. Yeah.
Yes. And so great, you have 86 likes from your friends, but do they really think your post is special? Are they really connecting you with you in a deeper way? Do they really appreciate you more as a human being? And the answer most of the time for most of our posts is no, but it makes us feel like they do.
Yeah.
And then even take comments, we get excited about the comments on our post, but then we see our best friend has commented Slay Queen for the 5th time in a row. That was more of a student reference. I don't think Jason's friends comment Slay Queen.
I've
many
never
of his
been called a
posts.
slay queen. Is that a positive thing?
That's a positive thing.
It
Yeah.
is. It
Yeah.
is. I
Right.
happen to
Slay-
know someone
is
who's
it
in
a-
college, and she's taught me to start using the slay
Oh,
the day.
okay.
So
Yeah.
I've
Teresa
heard
knows.
slay, just not slay.
You are
queen
totally
part,
slaying
but
this
yeah.
podcast,
Yes.
by the way.
Slay.
You are.
That's
Mhm.
well, just hashtag slay.
Hashtag slay.
Yes.
Yeah, I am familiar with that one, but yeah.
So, but yeah, and it doesn't have to be that, but think about that friend who comments mostly the same thing on all of your posts. What a beautiful picture. What a beautiful family.
true. Happy
You're so
birthday.
creative. Happy birthday. And it feels significant because the notification bells taught us when there's a comment, we're going to get social validation or
People are
social
engaging with
connection.
us somehow.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's so not.
It's so fake.
It's so not, right? Most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time. And this leads me to the final way they get you engaged. And we'll wrap up. We'll wrap up with
Let
this,
me-
and then
real
go
quick,
ahead.
Because
Yeah.
Facebook or Instagram are using that, and I assume Twitter, they are using that like or that love or whatever it is to okay, Jeremy likes that kind of content. I am going to show him more
yes.
of that.
Or YouTube,
Like,
yeah.
Yeah. We're going to show you more of that.
in your
More.
feed, yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. So if you're liking stuff that you don't really like, don't like it.
Yeah, right.
Does that
That's
make
true.
sense? Yeah.
Yeah, and that's
If you're
actually
just
another
trying
way.
to give someone,
Right.
commendation
Yeah.
because you like them as a person or you're trying to,
Right.
pad them, then
Yeah.
watch out. You're going to get more of it.
That's true. Yes. And even just on that note of what you like, the algorithm is designed to give you more of what you like so that you're on more. So either way, they get you. But on that topic, one of the reasons social media is most successful at keeping us online and getting us going back over time is because of the psychological trick known as intermittent variable reinforcement developed by psychologist B.F. Skinner. You guys can look this up afterwards.
I remember
him?
Skinner.
Yeah.
You've heard of Skinner?
High
Oh,
school
the actual
psychology
book,
class.
not
There
even
you
from
go.
social media.
Yeah.
That's a long time ago.
So and this doesn't necessarily apply to social media, but it's a tactic that social media programmers have used.
And say what it's called again.
So it's called intermittent variable reinforcement.
Reinforcement, yeah.
And so very short synopsis of what this is Skinner found that people who do a very simple task, such as logging onto social media, clicking the social media bell or like button or whatever, they will perform it over and over and over again if they're given a reward, which makes sense. And so the reward for us is when we click the like button, there's a, all these lights go off. Maybe there's a little
Yes.
ding. Another reward for you type in happy birthday in an iPhone now, all these balloons
Right.
pop up, right? There's a
Yeah.
little reward. Okay. And that gives us a little dopamine. And so
I thought that was just for me. What? Everyone
Yeah.
can do that? What?
everybody can do it. So he found that you'll do it over and over again. But he said he found that it was much more powerful and people did it more consistently and had more drive to do it if they didn't get a reward every single time. In fact, if they didn't know when the next reward was coming, but they knew it was going to.
It's like a game.
Exactly.
You never know.
Right. And think about your posts on any social media platform. You have no idea if you're going to get 5 likes or 250. You have no idea if you're going to get a bunch of positive comments or negative comments or no comments at all.
Or is this going to be the one that does get more?
Right. Or is this the one that's going to, bump me into the next, level, the 1,000 followers, the 10,000 followers, right?
Wow. Yeah.
And psychologically, we love doing things, and this applies to casinos as well. We love doing things where there's not a guaranteed reward, but a chance. And this increases our drive.
We'll get a reward sometime, right?
Yeah. If the rewards stop completely,
yeah,
then the incentive starts to decrease over time. But we actually have a high tolerance for not receiving rewards over and over again until we get that thing. And so bring it back to social media. That means it's designed this way. That means most of the time you are not getting social connection, validation, or the thing that you desire from it. But they know that. And your psychology is driving you to keep going in the hope that you get what you want eventually. So
they did this study, and it may have been Skinner that did this study with squirrels. And
I think he did it with animals first.
A treat, where if you treat them, if you reward them every time they push a button,
yes,
they will do it. And if you take it away after a couple times, they'll stop.
Right.
But if you do it intermittently, they will keep doing it
right.
indefinitely.
That's the exact one. He started with
We are
animals.
like lab rats.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So there's way more. We don't have time to talk about it, but I wanted to just wrap up with some practical tips.
Okay, Jeremy.
Yeah.
Give us some encouragement. Give us some practical tips in addition to what you shared, like putting the phone aside altogether. Tell us what we need to be doing.
Yeah.
Both for our kids and even for ourselves. Like,
for sure.
As someone who's an empty nester.
Yes.
Yeah.
And me as well.
We've all got them.
We've
right
all got
here.
the iPhones right here. I'm preaching to myself. Probably about 6 months ago, even before I decided to do social media technology as the topic, we as a family started taking our technology use more seriously. And I had mentioned I got a dumb phone because my phone fell out of my pocket. But I have the iPhone now again. And one of the things that I'm doing is my wife has set up parental controls on there. Every single phone, no matter if you have an iPhone or an Android, has parental controls, and you can set specific limits on specific apps. So I have YouTube blocked from all of my devices, except for my computer, and I try to use it just for work. If I need to find a video for a sermon or I'm watching a lecture or something like that. Yeah. I also have Facebook blocked from all of my devices, and except for Messenger, and I think some of you can relate to this. We want to still keep in touch with some of the
There's
people.
There's a lot of people that's how, I mean, even across the world that I don't get texts from, I get messages from. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And so many people use Facebook events as this is the invitation to so-and-so's surprise birthday party.
Yeah. Or even Marketplace, Jason mentioned, it's nice to get cheap stuff sometimes, right?
I mean, I may spend a little too much time looking for the cheap stuff.
Yeah, sure. So that's an option. But if you don't want to block an app completely, which is understandable, you can also set screen time limits. This is what my wife's doing. She has a screen time limit on Instagram and Facebook. It's set to 15 minutes a day because she's found that's really all she needs to keep in touch with her friends and to see their posts for that day. And everything extra is just wasted time.
Just wasted.
Right. And so again, the important thing though, especially if you have an iPhone, you as parents need to set it up and not give your kid the code.
Right.
You can set up screen time limit yourself, but you can ignore it if you want to.
Yeah.
And so that's not very helpful.
You might need to find
you
yourself or someone that is good at this to set up a service desk at the church, because I find this very confusing how to do.
Sure.
I don't know why, but I have messed it up on my kids' devices many times where they come to me and say, it's supposed to be 20 minutes, but it's way over. I'm like, how did that happen? And I don't know if I'm just
tell you.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Eventually they won't though, probably. I mean, I'm like, I don't know how to do it better than that. I mean, I'm really...
Well, there's a YouTube video about it.
I'm sure I can watch it. Yeah,
but there really is. But
Honestly, look up YouTube so you can figure out how to block YouTube.
Do you think that 15, 20 minutes?
Yeah.
Is that just for social media for her, or each?
That's for Facebook and Instagram. And so 15 minutes for Facebook, 15
So you can
minutes
actually
for
set
Instagram.
parameters on specific, not just social media apps.
And on websites. Because I don't have, on my computer, I just use Chrome to go to YouTube, right? Yeah. And so you can also go and say, hey, I'm not going to block an app, I'm going to block a website.
Safari or Chrome or the web browser.
Or so if I type in youtube.com in Safari or Chrome, both will block it.
Right.
Yeah. Another one, a student brought this up, and I thought it was creative. Every time, or the first time she clicks on Instagram, it reroutes her to the Bible app first.
That's
say that again.
So when she clicks on Instagram for the first time, it reroutes her to the Bible app first.
So she has another app that she's installed.
I see.
That will then
I didn't know they did
reroute
that.
her to that. That's cool.
And it's cool because I think a lot of us, we just instinctually click on these apps sometimes.
Yeah.
We don't even realize it. We
the
just
little
boom and go.
the red circle on my homepage.
Yeah.
And right now I have 4. I have a red 4 on my Facebook. Well, I better go figure out text messaging.
Yes.
I better go figure out what that
saying.
is. In fact, that's going to kind of bother me that
You're
I've got 2
about all the
unread
notification things.
Yeah, all those little
Obviously,
notifications.
I don't pay attention to those.
It's driven to
a lot of them
for sure.
I don't know that you can turn that off.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. There may be some app where you can, but I don't know.
It's like a Teresa.
Right.
You need to come in
There's
and
something
check
you need
these
to do.
out.
Okay, so Prime Video, I just found this out.
Yeah.
If you delete it and download it again, it resets. At least unless I have it set up wrong, it can reset your parental your limit.
Oh,
I
that's
didn't
good
know
to
that until my son told me that just the other day.
That's another thing. There are other apps you could use like Bark or Covenant Eyes that can block it. Outside apps that can block certain things that your kids watch or certain websites. But on iPhones especially, or any Apple products, you can delete apps and it will reset. So you can go into your iPhone and create it as such that your kid can't delete apps.
Okay, good to know.
But also very hard. Apple doesn't make this stuff very easy.
I don't
or
feel like they
accessible.
do either,
not.
and that's what we have as Apple products. But I'm really not
Yeah.
technologically very inclined either.
Yeah.
So
It
it might
behooves
just
them
be
to
me.
have you on your device more.
Exactly. Yeah. So if you are interested in learning more, honestly, probably talk to your high school kid. They probably know. But YouTube is a great resource. Just looking it up online will help. One final thing, just piece of advice, Teresa, you just mentioned, our need to constantly check our emails or constantly check our text messages, especially if we get a new one and that notification comes in. Turn off your notifications and then set a time each day that you're going to get to your emails or get to your texts. So that, because it's tempting to just check it every time a new one comes in. And we talked about how being constantly distracted hurts us in a variety of ways.
Well, in a book called Deep Work by Cal Newport, he talks about how, and you mentioned this in your sermon too, but how when you are in your flow state and when you're distracted, how long it takes to get back there. And if you're constantly getting a ding, or even, if you're in office and someone comes in and says, hey, how's it going? Or you get a phone call or whatever, it takes you out and it takes 10 to 15 to 20 minutes to get back into that again.
And it's not even just productivity. So many of us, we get the ding, and so we check the text, but then checking that one text turns into checking all the texts and then hopping on Instagram. And so we almost always spend more time than just responding to that email or just responding to that text.
True.
I'm making a note. I am not jumping on my phone, and I keep wanting to say fnubbing.
Snubbing with phones.
Snubbing with phones. That's
Deep
an
Work
interesting.
by Cal
Newport.
Okay.
That's a productivity book, but he mentions
I remember listening to that while I was listening to the sermon, and my phone is sitting on my hard desktop, and it keeps going. Brr, brr. It's it's just vibrating, and so I have a padded envelope right now on my desk, and I set it on top
to dampen it.
And it was like night and day. Made a huge difference.
Another strategy that I've heard from another podcast that I've heard is that, he set a time, from 12 to 1, he's going to check, and he is a producer, podcaster, person, whatever. And so getting on social media, he considers it part of his job. But he said from 12 to 1 is what he said. He always gives himself an hour to get his work done on the social media. And he deletes them every single time off his phone and reinstalls them. And I just thought that was an interesting.
Wow,
that's a lot of work though.
It is. Yeah.
I would love to just walk away from social media, but it is part of my job.
Right. Yeah. And it is for a lot of people, for small business owners, for people like you who work at companies and
entrepreneurs.
Any entrepreneur,
you're not going to
right?
Yeah, I mean, it's really is a tool that could be used for that growing business.
Last couple things I'll say, and things we should do. We talked about how you should not be getting your news from social media. Any social, even if they are a quote unquote expert, the things that they are putting out on X, on Facebook, is not their peer-reviewed work. It's their opinion. And sometimes it's a well-informed opinion, but sometimes it's not. And you as a person are inundated with so much information, we often don't have the time to check. Yeah. And so unfollow your favorite politicians, unfollow your favorite influencers who are often making you outraged because of all the crazy content you're seeing on the other side.
Or making you feel less than because you can't keep up.
Right. And please just get your news somewhere else. That's the biggest thing. Get your news somewhere else. It can be from, I would recommend Ground News. Ground News is an app that compares, I know some of us are skeptical of the media, but it compares all of the right-wing leaning media and all the left-leaning media and the centrists. And then it shows how many of them reported on this news story and then what their biases might be.
We'll link to that in the show.
Yeah, I think that might be helpful for some of us who feel overwhelmed with how we get information. And then last one, if you have high schoolers and some of these other tips I recommended don't work, at the very least, maybe take their phone away at night. Because we didn't even talk about this, but a lot of these kids aren't getting enough sleep and their phone time is cutting into their sleep time.
Yes, we have our really good friends. Their son's now in college, but when he lived at home at nighttime, everybody had a set time where the phones go on the dining room table to get recharged overnight.
Yes,
and
they
use traditional alarm clocks.
Yeah.
And
absolutely. They don't need them at night. They really don't. And it's going to be more beneficial for them if they're getting a good night's sleep and not tempted.
Ours is in our bedroom because our kids tend to stay up later than us nowadays. So
yeah.
They're getting older. Yeah, they're getting older.
Fair enough.
It's different.
Another thing that I was going to say, if you still want more suggestions or continue the conversation about technology and a little bit on the security side of things. I'm not sure how long ago, it might have been a year ago, but we had an extra episode with Jason Hildebrandt, who's an IT specialist and a cybersecurity expert in our church, that we kind of went over some of his strategies, but also just kind of the dangers of even identity and that kind of thing on the internet. There's a lot of different dangers.
That was an audio only thing. So if you're watching us on YouTube, we will link to the audio episode of that, as well as the Ground News link in the show notes.
Cool.
On all of our platforms. Well, guys, this is great. God created us for relationship.
Yes.
But he really did create us for real, interpersonal, meaningful, Jesus honoring relationships the way Christ would have done it. So thank you for having this discussion. And I know we could have got another hour.
Easily.
But anyway, all right, guys, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for making this one of the things that you choose to interact with online. We understand if you need to make a break. If not, we will see you here next week.
Thank you for listening to the TBC Extra Podcast. Please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts.